Greetings, salutations, and welcome to the Kreeger cast. I'm your host, Patrick Kreeger, and I'm joined once again by my father, Whit Kreeger.
Howdy.
Okay. Today we're continuing the series of our little talks about my father and his history. And one thing was I was watching an episode of Potential History the other day. Now, for those of you who don't know, Potential History is a YouTuber who does short videos mostly relating to World War II. He does videos on like particular tanks or particular battleships, or my personal favorite, he does a very in-depth look at the last tank battle in Cologne. That video is titled Last Panther in Cologne. And for those of you who like World War II, you know this Panther. You may not know that it's this particular Panther at this particular battle, but you know this particular tank because photographs of it are famous for representing the defeat of Germany during World War II. Well, anyway, he did a video marking the 100th anniversary of World War I, which at the date of this recording was yesterday. The 100th anniversary of the armistice. And he did this video that I thought was really quite moving, where he was talking about how there is no one left from World War I. There are no politicians, there are no generals, there are no soldiers, there aren't even really civilians that are left. There were a few people that were 1 or 2 years old, but there aren't many people left that have any living knowledge of the war. And he made an impassioned plea to people out there that if they are aware of any stories from any conflict, be it World War II to modern day, that they should sit those people down and record them. Record them in writing, record them in memory, record them in audiovisual formats. Just get these things down, because he made the point that the reason why World War I vets didn't like talking about the war was, in their own words, people didn't want to listen. And so I hope to change that a little bit here today, because as we all know, we're slowly, well, quite quickly actually, losing our people who experienced World War II firsthand. And my father's actually one of those people. Now, he experienced it mostly as a child, well, all as a child, but he has memories of the war and immediately afterwards, as well as stories of people he grew up with. So I'm hoping he'll share some of those with us today.
Yes, this is actually a really interesting time, and it also has a bit of nostalgia for me, because when I think about the war and the war years, which I experienced some of its the up times and some of the really bad times as well, because my consciousness encompassed the end of the war basically, and then the subsequent suffering and that the German people went through after 1945.
Oh, I don't think we made that clear that you were on the continent at the time.
Okay.
Sorry, just so our audience knows, you were a German civilian during the war.
Right, I was a child. The war ended when I was 6 years old, so that kind of gives you perspective. 1945. I was born in 1939. But what I've most regret is that I didn't more aggressively go after some sort of recording equipment for my father. Because all I can do is give my son secondhand information. Whereas if I had the recordings, you would have had firsthand information about a lot of things.
Yeah.
About a lot of things. But, I think when you're young, very young as I was, concerned with other things, that was not really all that important to me. And maybe you also think, oh, well, there's always time to do this, and pretty soon the people are gone,
Yeah.
and there's just no way back.
That's why I'm on you to set up that meeting with Russ and Hilmar.
Absolutely. You know, people that are in their 90s, we need to talk about it. And in fact, Hilmar was actually a young soldier during the war still, so
Yeah.
that's extremely valuable to get his impression down, especially in his charming German accent. Okay, so I was born in what is today Poland. In erstwhile it was before
Erstwhile?
yeah, erstwhile it was actually Prussia. It was the WW2. So it was German territory until the peace treaty of Versailles,
1918.
1918. Right. And my father and my mother were born in 1912 and 1913, respectively. So they were still born in the old Prussia.
Yeah.
So. But anyway, so this was the Vatican was an area that was really populated by a lot of Germans, and but you know, it was given to Poland because I don't know what right they actually had to this, because you know it was part of Prussia for what, a couple of hundred years or so, you know.
Yeah, I'd be speaking from ignorance if I say too much on the subject. I know that part of it was that the Poles were given all the territory they controlled at the end of the war. So I don't know if that implies that they controlled this region of Prussia or not. I don't know. Might have been part of the sanctions after the war.
Well, the Germans simply had no rights after the war whatsoever. You know, they lost big chunks of their country. You know, for instance, what we called Ostpreußen, you know, which was isolated and had something to do with the Hitler's need to go to war with Poland, because they just would not give him any kind of land access to East Prussia, you know, and so the only way to have communication with Prussia at that time was through the Baltic Sea, or we called it the East Sea. Anyway, so I was born in 1939 in July 24th to be exact, and I was my family's firstborn. So, and a son. And that was, in those days, was a big deal. I don't know how big of a deal it is now, but I'm certainly happy with my son. You know, this has given me great joy over the years. But I immediately did not give my father a lot of joy, because he looked at this kid that came out of my mom, and I had white hair. And he said, he was born with feathers. He told me that story many times, and my mom and dad used to laugh about it. Anyway, so the first thing he did is he you know, as soon as was brought home and so forth, you know, he cut my hair off, totally off, and by golly, it grew back kind of blonde, you know. So it was good. He was finally happy with it. So I was born just before Poland was invaded. It was invaded on September 1st. I was born on July 24th, so you see what was going on. So my mom told me that Dad had sent her out into the countryside because we knew that there would be bombs, you know, that kind of thing. And so she was out there in the countryside, you know, and she told me, you know, how she had me in her arms and listening to the airplanes going across, you know, which is really, you know, if you think about it, it's kind of bizarre, you know. Here are all these Germans, and the Germans from Germany are invading your area where you're living, you know, with the Poles and the Jews and whoever, you know, the eclectic populace was at that time. And so your people are coming, you know, with bombs and stuff after you. That must have been really something bizarre. Anyway, my mom was pretty scared about that. My dad, he stayed wherever he was. He was working at that time somewhere. And so we made it through. You know, Mom stayed in a farmhouse someplace, and So it was with friends, probably Polish friends. I mean, the Poles and the Germans and the Jews actually they got along famously well in the Warthegau, and I'm going to refer to that area as the Warthegau because the River Warthe, is what named the area of Prussia, of the eastern part of Prussia, as the Warthegau. So when the Germans came in, they changed all the names of the cities, back to what they were before, and they got their German names back, and so forth. So, my family did very well. My dad had an important job and as a steel engraver. And so, there was plenty of money, and we had a large apartment in the city of Radom. So I spent my childhood there, basically, until near the end of the war, till just about 1944. And I remember a lot about it. One of the things that I do remember is that I was hospitalized. And it must have been about maybe 2 or 3 years old, because I don't remember the hospital so much as I do remember coming home. That I remember. And that was a real fiasco because I was in a hospital for several months for a simple hernia. I mean, how ridiculous is that, right?
Yeah.
And now it's not even a hospitalization procedure, it's just you go in and out, right? It's an outpatient procedure. But back then, I had the bad luck of having, I think my first doctor that started the operation for some reason, but didn't finish it, he went home and back to his office, and the Polish partisans threw a hand grenade in his office, and he actually lost one or both of his hands. Anyway, so he was incapacitated. He didn't die. So I was still lingering in the hospital, and somebody had to fix me up. So they, the next doctor that worked on me, somehow had the bad luck of working on a Polish partisan, saving his life. And so he came under suspicion as a collaborator and was arrested, and they took him away. And, maybe he was a collaborator. But my dad always said, well, they caught him, sewing up some Poles, and that kind of thing. So who knows what he was. But so doctor number 3 finally finished the job. But now, like 5 or 6 weeks went by, maybe even more. I don't know. But it was long enough for me to be bedridden to when I came out of the hospital, I couldn't walk.
I always assumed that was when you had polio.
But that was another time.
I always assumed that forgetting the walking thing was from your polio experience, but it was.
Yeah, I was paralyzed with polio as well, But that was much later. I was like 9 or 10 years old at that time. So anyway, that was really a bad time. But what I do remember is I remember, as a matter of fact, I have pictures of that time, so we can kind of tell how old I was, because I'm there. Somebody took pictures of me in a crib.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't walk. So they, I.
Oh.
Yeah, so they kept me in a crib, so I could move around a little bit, because what would I do? Crawl, I don't know how that all worked, but I remember being in that crib because I can still look at the black and white pictures in my pajamas, But anyway, my dad said that somebody gave him some apples, so he came upon some apples, and the apples were so big that they were nearly as big as my head. Now, I've never seen an apple quite so big, so this Poles must have known how to grow big apples, anyway. But I do remember green apples, that were extremely large. But of course, I was a kid, so
Yeah.
things were large. Yeah, so I got over that, and I finally was able to walk again, and everything was kind of cool. And so, I remember going to ice cream parties. I was just talking with you about that, at the governor's mansion. So my dad was pretty well respected in the community. In fact, he had the hunting rights to some 40,000 hectares, which is an enormously large amount of hunting rights. And he bragged about the fact, that there was always something in season. So when he had to entertain dignitaries or so, there was always, they could go out hunting, and come back to some lodge or someplace, and the food would be prepared for them and so forth. Well, in fact, I was able to go out hunting with him. Well, it wasn't really hunting. It was fishing.
Oh, is this the time with the carp?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that I should I be talking about this?
You can talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so we were in horse and buggy because, the hunting was mostly done like this. There were no roads, it's not, you could drive to an area, and then some farmer was engaged or something and with horses, and they would, take him to where hunting was to be done. But in this particular case, we were fishing. And for some reason, it was kind of like a buckboard kind of buggy, I remember, because, it's clear in my mind, they had me along with. And so my dad and his buddies, they came to this pond, and instead of putting out fishing rods and stuff, one of them threw a grenade in the pond, And so the grenade went off, and pretty soon, they were waiting out there, picking up nice big fish. They were up there belly up. And they were not dead. They were just stunned. So they came up to the top, and they picked out a few big fish. And I remember they put them under the buckboard seat, and they had straw in there, and they kept the fish in there. It's amazing, what you remember of those things, And, the detail, because I have to tell you that just talking about this actually kind of puts me there, at that moment, so I remember the smells, the sounds, and it's kind of strange, Anyway, so we brought those fish back home, and, my dad put them put the fish into the bathtub, and they started swimming. I remember that, Anyway, so ultimately they were butchered. We had a lard house or a lardery or whatever it was.
Larder, I think is the term.
Larder, yeah. Just on the, before you come in the apartment, which was an upstairs apartment. We were on the top floor. And, through the hallway you come to that area, and it was like cabinets and stuff. But I remember there were rabbits hanging in there, you know what I mean? It was, in the wintertime, they were hanging in there, rabbits with their pelts on, and game birds, all kinds of nice birds and stuff, that was, our cooks, the maid, would prepare for us to eat and so forth, That's where I came first in touch with Hasenpfeffer, that became one of my favorites. I mean, I haven't had in decades, but God, it was so good, to eat, game, properly prepared.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That is kind of hard to come by these days,
yeah,
and in these locations.
Evidently, in Northern California, up in the hills, there are still restaurants, that do prepare game, venison and so forth, So I guess it can be had if you know where to go.
Even Arby's does game from time to time.
Right now, yes.
Yeah.
Just saw the advertisement.
Oh, did they do
just heard
duck?
No, they. I think they have a buffalo or something.
I know they
at
did
least
elk
that.
once.
They did elk. I remember that too.
I thought all their ads were leading up to there would be a duck burger or something.
But you know, when you have game birds, and well, like I said, my favorites were really the rabbits. Thoroughly cooked. I remember how good they tasted, as a kid. So, well, I think I was old enough, must have been after 3 years of age or so, that I was actually, that my mom decided that I need to go to kindergarten. So it must have been 3 or 4, probably 3. So I went to kindergarten, and I remember we had sandboxes and stuff. And you know what? At the kindergarten, I did not like the food at all for some reason. And what I would typically do is when they served the food, we were sitting at round tables with the rest of the kids, I would just empty the plate under my chair, because they come and check whether you ate or not. Well, I emptied. I don't know why I didn't like the food, but I always threw that away. And well, they came, they kind of got onto it.
I would imagine. That doesn't seem like the most clever plan.
No, it was not a great plan. As a matter of fact, I don't know what possessed me to do this. I went into the restroom once, and I don't know, they had a sponge, and I don't know what for. Maybe you use the sponge to wash your hands or something. So it was a pretty large sponge, and I thought it was fun to take that sponge, with water and throw it up against the wall and the ceiling and all that stuff. And so I had a lot of fun doing this, and I guess they got kind of ticked off about that.
I would imagine so.
Because I really made a mess of that restroom, It wasn't like I was throwing shitballs around, but it was just that sponge,
Oh, yeah.
But in any case, so the headmistress, went and got my mom, because my mom saw this. I remember doing it, but they showed it to my mom. They brought her into, look what your son did. We can't keep him here. Because evidently I must have been a handful, with the food, maybe I did some other things. I don't know what I did, but I just remember these two particular incidents, that must have caused me some pain or something. But anyway, so you know what my mom did? That was just funnier than hell. She says, oh, you've got to keep him. How about if I pay double the amount of the tuition?
Wow.
And they took that, and so they kept me.
Okay.
And oh, there was another incident. One day, they couldn't find me.
Okay.
They couldn't find me. They looked all over for me, but I went home with one of the guys, to his house. So, I don't know, I liked it a lot, in a lot of things. You wouldn't have done anything like that when you were little, I'm sure.
Well, thank you. But I do want the dear listener to know my father is still quite the handful.
Oh, I resemble that remark. But anyway, so yeah, the growing up was actually kind of fun, but there were some dark moments also. For instance, what I do remember is I remember walking with my mom at night in the streets of Radom. And it was the most spectacular sight because there were no streetlights, there were no lights at all. But the streets were full of people. And the only way that you knew that there were people is everybody was wearing something like a brooch. And that brooch was radioactive. And it glowed in different colors. Different colors. There were caterpillars, there were frogs, there were flowers. And that's how people knew they couldn't bump into each other. Didn't bump. He bumped anyway, but, everybody forgave everybody because, when they anticipated an air attack, then the city went dark.
Yeah.
Okay.
Blackout conditions.
Blackouts. So I remember all these dancing, beautiful things, dancing because all you see is this You know, you don't see the people, but you just see those brooches, you know, and maybe some earrings, you know, so you knew it was a woman. But the streets were full of people. I don't know why at night, you know, but I do remember that distinctly, you know, because I was so fascinated by those little brooches.
I don't think you mentioned it, but they were probably coated in radium.
Yeah, they were glowing.
Yeah.
You know, they were glowing. I mean, you could see them. They were definitely radioactive, you know. So, but in colors,
Yeah.
and they were pretty, you know. I mean, caterpillars and things, you know.
You can do the glow-in-the-dark paints with radioactive materials in yellows, greens, blues, oranges.
Okay.
Those are about the colors you can do. I don't know if you can do red. You might be able to, but that's beyond the point.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so that was kind of scary, you know, in a way, but also beautiful.
I was going to say, I don't think
time.
you knew too much about radiation as a small child.
No, I didn't know anything about the radiation. You know, I thought it was great, you know, but you know, it was scary that everything was dark.
Yeah.
You know, so that part was. Then I also remember, you know, to go to a movie. I was in a movie theater with my mom, and the movie was a Punch and Judy movie.
I think you have to explain what Punch and Judy is to our audience.
Well, you know, it's Punch and Judy. Punch is a guy that looks like a you know, a clown, or actually like more like a court jester, you know. And he has some sort of conversation, you know, with usually a female or some other character. And they're, you know, in a puppet show, basically. But this was a movie, you know, of this puppet show. It wasn't a puppet show. It was a movie of a puppet show.
Huh.
It was projected.
The way you described it to me all these years, I've always assumed that it was like, for lack of a better term, shadow puppet show. You know, where there was a like some sort of demonstration going on with light and then projecting it on a wall.
Well, you know, I've wondered about that because I was convinced that these characters were real. And here was this guy, you know, with a like a bat, you know, wailing on this other person, and I screamed my head off. You know, I was scared as hell. And you know, they're trying to tell me, my mom trying to tell me that, you know, this is not real. He's not real. Oh, yes, it is, you know. And I remember looking back, and it looked to me like there was somebody there, you know, wailing on somebody. So maybe it was a shadow show of some sort of a thing.
The other thing it could be is that, dear listener, if you've ever been to a movie theater and you look behind yourself in a movie theater towards the projectionist, there's often a pane of glass between the projector and the projected room, and you can see the image of whatever's on the screen on that piece of glass.
Okay, and that's a real reasonable explanation. But to me, this was real.
Yeah, you were like 3 or 4. I mean,
Yeah,
seriously.
My mom had to take me out of there. You know, I remember that.
I remember being small and having the Pokemon movie scare me. So, you know, it's a thing small children do.
So, in the apartment at Christmas time, we had a really large Christmas tree. Now, I realized that I was little. But
sometimes things were really bigger in the past.
But this was, I mean, the apartment, the salon was big enough to where I had a swing from the ceiling. You know, I mean.
So it was like a good 12-foot ceiling or something like that.
Maybe, because there was a swing in there for me, and that I used to, that's how I learned how to swing, you know. Maybe. So.
You know, every kid has a swing in their house.
Yeah, right. They do, you know. Anyway. Yeah, I remember. So the Christmas tree was, you know, of course, with the glass ornaments and real candles. You know, I mean, we didn't use electric candles or anything like that. The candles, you know, had candle holder and, you know, yeah, the candle. But, you know, there was...
were they lit all the time, or were they just lit for special occasions like dinners or stuff like that? Or?
Well, they were lit at night. you
Okay.
know, and usually through the night because, you know, the Christmas tree was normally set in the center to where there was a conversation, you know, the dining room table was nearby, you know, and the Christmas tree was there. Pretty much like what we do here, except,
Yeah.
you know,
On steroids and with real fire.
right. No, seriously, you know, this is what, because, you know, one of the things, you know, that even the adults used to do is they would take a little twig of the pine tree and hold it over the flame, you know, because it kind of made a nice smell, a Christmassy smell, you know. So that was very common. Everybody did. And I had no idea how many houses were burned down with a tree, you know, but nobody really cared. I mean, this is what you did, you know.
Yeah.
And if somebody burned their houses down, they were a bunch of dumb shits, you know. So, you know.
Fair enough.
But the thing that I remember about the Christmas tree is a couple of things, actually. I think they happened pretty much on the same day or maybe close together. It's one of the things, you know, my dad always had a hunting dog or two, you know. And but you know the dog was always kept in another room, you know, it wasn't with the people, you know, like in the salon, you know, the dining room, you know. And so I don't know whether somebody sent me for a salt shaker or something, and so I walked by the dog and I decided that the dog needed to be salted, you know, and so I salted the dog and the dog grabbed my hand.
I mean, fair enough.
And of course I screamed, you know, and when I screamed, you know, my mom came running. The dog bit this kid, you know, and you know, the dog's name was Bill.
What?
Yeah, that was Bill. That was
A
Bill.
German dog named Bill.
Yeah, it was a short hair setter type of dog, you know, a German short hair, I think they called him. Anyway, Bill, yeah, and so my dad, you know, calmed things down. You know, he says, "Oh, look at him! He didn't even break the skin. You know, he just." So what did you do? What happened? So I told him what happened is you know, that I took the salt shaker and shook it at the dog's head and I told him that with his eyes went, instead of blink blink, you know, in German I said mink mink.
Is that actually the German
evident-
phrase?
Maybe it is mink mink instead of blink blink. But in any case, so I told my parents, oh, and the dog went mink mink and then he bit me. Well, then they figured out what was going on, you know, that I salted him.
You
So anyway,
assaulted him.
I did assault. but more about Bill. Bill loved me. Okay? And I know that because when I was still a baby in a carriage, my mom went shopping or something, you know. And it was, I guess, you know, it's commonplace. It was too hard to bring the baby buggy into the store, you know. So just left me out there and told the dog to keep an eye on this kid.
Just out in the open, you know, hey.
Yeah. And so she goes in there and does her shopping and stuff like that. But when she comes out, there are all these people around my baby carriage, you know. And she hears the dog growling, you know. So she works her way through the people there. And there I am screaming my head off, okay? And the people wanted to give me a binky or something, you know what I mean, to calm me down. But the dog wouldn't let anybody near me. You know, anytime that somebody reached, the dog, you know, started growling and showed his teeth, you know. So nobody touched me. So anyway, I know that the dog actually loved me, was protective of that. So, yeah, Bill was a great dog. He's a dog that also carried his own leash, you know, for a walk, and was just a, and he was not gun shy. Otherwise, my dad wouldn't have kept him. You know, he when he got a new dog, you know, he always took him hunting, and if they got scared of a shot, you know, when a shotgun went off, you know, then
Time for a different dog.
Yeah, because you know, my dad always said you can't train that out of him. Anyway, yeah, my dog had a number of dogs, even German Shepherds, loved Dobermans,
Is this
that
it?
kind of thing. Yeah, that's Bill. That's Bill, right there. How'd you do that?
The wonder of Google Photos.
Yeah, that's the guy. That's the guy that bit me and loved me. I assaulted him. That was really cool.
Dear
Yeah,
listener,
that was Bill.
I took all the photographs my father has just loose and went through the process of scanning them and putting them,
So that was the right age. See,
Well,
of course,
I
there
think
I'm
that
older.
I was gonna say, and the dog is too.
The dog got older. Yeah.
So I went through the process of scanning all the photographs my dad had and making them available to the whole family on Google.
Google Photo. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, that was neat that you picked that up. And so yeah, we do have at least that.
Yeah, and I think we got a couple photos of you in a baby buggy. We have definitely you with a trike.
Yeah, that's me. Well, I had all of the toys that a kid could have in those days. And, that trike, I rode that inside.
Yes.
You know?
You and your little monkey.
Yeah, the monkey. Oh, my God, yes. But you notice that, my hair is trying to grow back up,
I'll throw a couple of photos of the on this thing so people kind of know what's going on.
That's really precious. I forgot that we had all those.
I think my favorites are you and your lederhosen.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I love that you unironically wore lederhosen.
okay, and there I am with my brother Heinz.
Oh, that's Heinz.
That's Heinz.
Huh.
Yeah.
Cool. I didn't know this. I always assumed that was Walter.
No. Walter wasn't born yet.
Oh, then there's a few photos of you with a young child around that time.
That's always Heinz. He was the adult in the family. No kidding. That kid was something else. He was one of the smartest little guys that I can remember. Of course, I probably ascribe more intelligence to him now. He and I both later on in was 1945. We got diphtheria, and we were both hospitalized. He died, didn't come out.
I'm not actually 100% sure what diphtheria is, to be honest.
It's pretty bad. We had really high fever, and he was hallucinating. My mom always said he sang like an angel, and I remember that, because he was in the bed next to me, in the bed next to me there. Yeah, that was tragic. Anyway, so let's see. So where were we? Well, actually, those war era times were actually pretty good times for my family and I. My dad was running a big bookstore, made a lot of money, and we lived very comfortably. We always had a maid. In fact, when my dad proposed marriage to my mom, she says, well, but I don't know how to cook. And he says, don't worry, we'll always have somebody cooking for us. And that promise lasted all the way till the end of the war, when my mom had to start cooking. But once Germany lost the war, we were, we lost everything.
Yeah.
Everything that we had was lost, including the bank accounts and everything.
Well, yeah, and all the physical possessions, too.
Pretty much. There was some jewelry that my mom and dad, probably had on their fingers, during the refugee days. And, the sale of some of that jewelry really sustained us. It was, we were able to get some food in the black market through bartering some of our jewelry. The one piece of jewelry that my dad kept was a tie stick pin, diamond tie stick pin that had garnets on the outside. It's kind of I think there are pictures of him with that somewhere.
I think so too.
Yeah. And I think John has it. My brother John has it.
Has the stick pin?
Yeah.
Well, that's good. It's in the family.
So ultimately, I was the oldest of five. Which the fifth one was born in the United States in 1957. That's John that I just talked about. So, about the war years, well, rumors of the Russians coming into our area really concerned us, and ultimately the family had to move. But before we did, my dad made sure that we actually safeguarded some of our greatest possessions, which was actually, I think, an activity in futility.
Yeah.
But what he did is he had a carpenter come, and well, actually, he didn't come, but he ultimately came. But he had a carpenter make wooden boxes, really sturdy wooden boxes. Lots of them, quite a few of them. I don't know how many, but I remember it's quite a bit. And the carpenter did come to the house with a lot of boxes. And these boxes were filled with things that we thought were valuable, like all of our silverware, which was real silver, china from China, glassware of the finest sort, and leather-bound editions of whatever book came out of importance came out, I guess, in the last few decades, that my parents thought were of some collective value or significance. But it was primarily leather-bound copies of books, like first editions, whatever. And so all of that loot was taken to by truck, taken to my grandfather's grandparents' house, the Schlesners, who lived in Gurnau at the time. And they had prepared and dug a big hole in their backyard. I remember that because I've seen it. And they uploaded the truck and buried all those boxes in their backyard, covered it up. Now, this is the kind of activity that went on all over the place since probably before the Roman days.
Yeah, you always bury stuff when the war's coming.
Exactly. And so I'm sure that people went through with rods, in that house and after the war, because my grandparents lost that property to the Poles after the war because they were simply arrested because they were German, and put into concentration camps, my grandmother and my grandfather. And my grandfather was actually deported to Siberia. So he spent a number of years in Siberia. They did let him go finally, like in 1950, maybe 1949. So he spent probably a good 5 years in Siberia. And, this was a guy at the time, in his late 40s, early 50s. And he hadn't worked with his hands for a long time because he was, the general manager of a cloth manufacturing company. Well, different ones, because he was a real expert in cloth weaving and that machinery, especially the machinery. He understood, these weaving machineries would do, and how to fix them if they broke down. They're pretty complicated pieces. If you ever seen a weaving machine, you'll be amazed, of how many moving parts there are and how they all have to work together. Boggles my mind, when I see it. In any case, so, hard labor for him caused him hard problems. So when he came back from, when the Russians finally let him go, he had what they called angina pectoris, which is a problem with the heart.
Yeah.
Ultimately, he died suddenly from that, but he spent maybe a year or two with us, something like that. My grandmother, on the other hand, we never heard from her ever again. We have no idea where she died, where she was buried, or anything like this. And that's really tragic, because she came, her maiden name was Brown, and she came from a very wealthy family. In fact, the Poles are now doing reparations, for the German properties that they confiscated back then. And only just a couple, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we were contacted by a company that is looking for heirs in order to pay those reparations. And by golly, I fell into that category, as the oldest surviving member of the Schlesners, and with a maiden name of Brown.
Wow.
But it turned out that I didn't benefit from that inheritance, from that payment, because there was actually a survivor that was still living, and there was a closer survivor to the Browns. So
I always wondered what happened to that.
that's what happened. So. You have to give them credit. The Germans, do really diligent search on this, and so they actually contacted me, and actually contacted Marge, my wife. She's the one that got a call and said, hey, this is what's going on. So for a short moment, we thought we were going to be wealthy or something. But, it turned out to be not even a hamburger, so. Anyway, let's see, the war. Yeah, so, with that, my dad took the family to Czechoslovakia. He, though, stayed in Radom till just about, he heard the bombs falling, he told us later on, And, when he felt that, okay, now there's fire in the streets and things like that, so houses were being bombed, he also left, and that started us on a refugee adventure that is probably worthy of a story all by itself.
Yeah, I actually think that we're pretty good for today, and we'll pick this up tomorrow.
Yeah, whenever it's convenient.
All right. So thank you for joining us on this adventure, dear listener. Thank you to Potential History for kind of prodding me to do more of this. And until next time, dear listener, see you out there.